Hey everybody, it's Randy with Carchaeology, and today's video I'm going to dive into the history of the Patriot, this crazy three-wheeled rocket ship of a car. What is it really all about? Who built it? How did it start out? How did it end up here? Let's get into it. So, quite obviously, we've got something really unique here. And by the looks of it, it looks like something that probably would have been done, well, gosh, maybe in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. It's almost got that red, white, and blue bicentennial kind of crazy stuff going on. Although the shape of it, it's such a futuristic shape, it really could be from any era. But one of the first clues that clued me onto it being something other than a 60s build is right there, that Harley-Davidson front end. This is an early front end. This is probably something from, I'd say, the 30s or 40s as far as timeline. I don't know exactly when they stopped doing this design of Springer front end on Harleys, but that's an old piece. Now, you would think that if this car was built in the 60s or 70s, that they would have used something that was a little more modern than that. Other things that I'm seeing that lead me to believe that it's a little older than it first looks are some of these aircraft gauges that are in here. Some of this stuff, to me, looks like it's probably from the 50s or so. I mean, the design of this whole thing is really quite mental. It's hard to know what is what. You know, the Corvair power plant that's in here, that dates to the 60s, obviously. Because that's the era of Corvair. I haven't looked up numbers on this to see. The car is actually registered as a 62 special construction. So I don't know what that refers to. Maybe that's the year of the engine? Heck, I don't know. So, along with the car, we did find a pile of paperwork as well as some signage and some pictures and things like that were in the house. Now, I knew that there was a story behind it. Roger always said that it was something special and that it had been a show car back in the day. Some of that's quite obvious by looking at it. But honestly, I really didn't know the whole history of it until I started digging through all of the pieces. So let me go into it and we'll kind of go back in time through all of it. So this drawing right here, this illustration, which is dated 1972, shows the car in its current form. So, well, that leads me to believe that it was done like that, at least prior to 1972. Now, we've got a few historic photos here. This is Roger's son, Mike, sitting in the car at some point. This is at a Corvair meet where they brought it. Here's a picture of it sitting in the driveway next to one of Roger's Lincolns. He had a lot of those sort of things in the past. One of the things that really threw me for a loop when I got into the house and started looking through stuff was this, the Patriot. General Motors experimental car shown around the world, cost to build $80,000 from the Bob Older collection. Now, talking to Mike, it sounds like Roger bought the car from this Bob Older collection at an auction. Now, this General Motors experimental car thing, I don't know where that came from. Roger always referred to the car as the Patriot. Obviously, with a Chevy motor in the back of it, the Corvair, there's some GM stuff there, but one would think that if it was actually a General Motors experimental car, that they would probably use more GM stuff, probably not a Harley front end. So one of the things that I thought was the most interesting was this letter that I found. So this was dated 1993. That Roger had a copy of, and apparently it's a letter from the original builder of the car back in the day. So let's see if I can go on here. This was to Jim. This was one of the previous owners of the car that Roger managed to track down. So it said, "Thank you for the phone call. It came as quite a surprise. My recollection of, let's see, some of it's kind of hard to read here. My recollection 40 years ago are a bit fuzzy, but I believe the Jetmobile started from sketches utilizing aircraft fuel tanks to achieve the aerodynamic shape I had in mind. The sketches evolved into three-view layout plan from which further planning was accomplished. The front wheel assembly consisted of a Harley-Davidson fork shortened to fit a designated area. The front wheel was a 4x8, but later changed to a Cub wheel and tire, which I think he means like a Piper Cub wheel and tire, which looking at that wheel on there and on the tire, I saw air something. So it's actually aircraft landing gear front wheel. The front wheel, let's see, blah, blah, blah. The main body was basically a P-38 belly tank modified with 4 cylindrical section in the cockpit area. Rear fenders were P-51 wing tanks. The main frame was all welded 4-inch steel. The original engine was a Lycoming 75 horsepower, driving a Harley transmission with a reverse. The lack of adequate cooling caused the engine to run hot. So, as I mentioned on the phone, the car was, being repainted at Peck Hunsberry's paint shop in Frederick when fire broke out from lacquer fumes ignited by an old stove used for heat. The intense heat melted the lead from the car. What a mess. Anyhow, its restoration was started in Boonesboro. At this point in time, the V860 and hydromatic transmission were installed. 2 small radiators were used at each grille. These changes were a blessing to the operation of the car. I made a plaster mold of the canopy and took it to Baltimore for forming. It was not possible to pull the plastic from the mold as one piece, so that explains the 2 halves of the canopy. Once again, the car was finally finished, including Mr. Hunsberry's beautiful lacquer job. The Jetmobile was shown in Hartford, Connecticut, New York City, Indianapolis, various parades, etc. It was an enjoyable experience to know where the car is today. God only knows. Let's see. I'm enclosing some pics from my train project in 1957. Good luck, Jim. So, wow. Lycoming aircraft engine, flathead V860, belly tank or fuel tank things for wheels in the back. Well, I'm not seeing that here. Obviously, the Harley front end we see here, the aircraft front tire we see here. So this thing has undergone a metamorphosis over the years. It also sounds like it has done that once before, burning up in a fire in a paint shop at some point. That has had some changes on it as well. So let's dive further into the history here because there is an awful lot that's here to see. So there were some magazines that were in the cockpit of the car. So this one right here, this How to Customize Cars and Rods. This is from 1973, and it shows a picture of the car here. So this picture, I believe, was of the car when it had the V860 in it in the back. So this was during the second iteration. This was after they changed it, and I think when it burned up in the fire, or maybe prior, I'm not exactly sure. I found this Mechanics Illustrated magazine here. This is from the 1960s, where there's an article on the car here. So they call the car the Ventura here, and you can see some things that are obviously the same. So the steering wheel that's currently in the car is there. The gauges, the dash panel, a lot of the machine turning of that sort of stuff is present. I'm seeing all the machine turn details and stuff underneath, much of which is still there. And this is when the car had the V860 engine. This was from a 1940 Ford, and it had an old hydromatic transmission in it. He talks about the canopy here, all the aviation influence, and that it was built in Hagerstown, Maryland. You can see a picture here of it with the V860 in place, and the back of it there. It's a really swoopy, sexy machine, without a doubt. But let's go in a little bit deeper into its past there. So, let me dive into this first. This was something that we found here. This was printed off, 3-wheel special, powered by a rear-mounted Ford V860, chain drive, Willys rear axle, old juice drive is used, airplane fuel tanks, cycle spring front. Featured in Yugoslavia exhibit by U.S. government. Owner Frank Delago, Hagerstown, Maryland. So, diving deeper into it, I found this Mechanics Illustrated magazine from 1952. Now, this shows the car in its first form. And check this baby out. So this, when it was first built, actually had a Lycoming V8 in it. That was, or a Lycoming engine. That was an aircraft engine that was mounted in the back. You can see the fuselage here of the belly tank, as well as the wing tanks here over the wheels. We'll flip on into the article here as well. And you can see Richard Harp, the original builder of the car, with the car there. So 25-year-old draftsman Richard Harp spent his spare time kicking around the airfields of Western Maryland, longing for any chance to bolt off into that wonderful wild blue yonder. But since having a baby, he wanted to keep on the ground, and so he built himself an aircraft that he could drive. Fantastic. Now, obviously, there's been some major changes to it since these days here, although I see some things that have remained the same. The fuel tank that's right here looks like it might be the same tank that is in there. You can see that Harley-Davidson front end that's in there. There's been a lot of things, perhaps the major framework of it, that all remain the same. The car was all over the place. Here's a neat thing with TV star Dagmar in the car. At Grand Central Palace at some crazy car show. This is another image that I came across, something that was framed on the wall, belly tank, 3-wheeler, American hot rod. I actually found a reference to the car, calling it the Jetmobile, in a book on American car manufacturers, and it actually shows the Jetmobile there. So, the Patriot here has gone through many changes. While it's currently called the Patriot, at one point it was called the Ventura, and prior to that it was called the Jetmobile. So what do you do with a car like this with this sort of history? Do you restore it back to its original guise, which was certainly the most spectacular of its design, or do you just preserve it in the history that you see it here? Now, the history that I see here, I've been unable to find any real record of it being done and shown in its current form with the Corvair engine. Obviously, we've got that drawing that was done in the early 70s of it. We've got the car here in front of us with the details and stuff that are on it. And being as it's a car that I'm not going to hold on to, it's something that I'm just kind of helping the family with. I think the goal is just to clean it up, detail it, and try to make the most out of it, just the way that it is. But I'd be curious to hear what you would do. With crazy history like this, of being perhaps one of the wildest 1950s customs ever, do you bring it back to that point? Do you bring it back to the point where it had the V860 in it? It was certainly an awesome looking ride at that point as well. And it's pretty darn cool the way that it is now. So this car has gone through 3 different changes, all of them pretty spectacular. I think this General Motors experimental car shown around the world thing is, well, absolute bullshit. But it is a fun part of its history. It's where it's got its name, the Patriot. The Patriot, we will continue to call it. And as far as what the future holds for the car, for now, we're going to keep it as it is. But in the future, will it go back to what it was in the past? Only time will tell. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Fun project here in the lab. Carchaeology. Dig it up and drive it. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.